everyone, Andrea Walford here for Simon Says Stamp. In today's video tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this baby birthday card featuring exclusive products from Simon Says Stamp. So I started off with a 4x5¼ inch piece of Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and I'm working on my Ranger nonstick craft sheet. Now for the background on my card, I wanted to create a watercolor type application. So I started off by taking my mop brush, dipping it into clean water, and then applying just a layer of water to the background of my watercolor paper to frame in where I wanted to apply my color. I then used my Tim Holtz Sponge Sugar Distress Stain and applied 3 separate layers of color, making sure that I dried my watercolor paper piece in between each layer. By working layer upon layer, making sure the previous layer is dry, you end up with a really neat buildup of color, and you can end up with some really unique effects around the edges of your watercolor wash. Now once that last layer was dry, my next step was to take my Simon Says Stamp Circle Dot stencil and apply some Seedless Preserves Distress ink through the stencil using a mini ink blending tool. So now when I remove this, here you can see what that looks like, and you can see that I deliberately applied less color towards the edges of the watercolor areas because I wanted it to look like it was kind of fading out as it moved to the edges. So I have here the Simon Says Stamp Circle Saying Stamp Set, and I'm using the largest of the circle sayings that have the happy birthday sentiment on there. Now I've already removed it from my acetate sheet, and I just wanted to share a little trick with you. If you take this stamp and you just try to mount it to an acrylic block, you run the risk of having it mount a little bit crooked, so you're not going to get your perfect circle. So if you flip your stamp upside down so that the portion that actually stamps is face downwards, and then just carefully drop it on your surface, and then take your acrylic block, or in this case I'm using my Fiskars stamp press, and then you press it down onto the stamp, you'll maintain that beautiful circular shape of the stamp. It won't distort. So now I have here a scrap piece of Simon Says Stamp 120-pound white cardstock. I'm going to take an anti-static pouch, or also known as an embossing pouch, and rub it over the surface. Then I'm going to take my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm going to flip the lid over and then just press this against my stamp to ink it up. Once my stamp is inked, I'm going to take it, I'm going to flip it over top of my cardstock, and then I'm just going to press down with my Fiskars stamp press and then lift. Now, while the VersaFine is still wet, I'm going to take my Wow Primary Ebony Superfine Embossing Powder, and I'm going to sprinkle that over top. You can see I'm working on a coffee filter. And tap off the excess. Then I always like to flip my cardstock over and just give it a little flick. Now I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to heat that until my embossing powder melts. So with my piece now embossed, I'm going to take the largest circle from my Spellbinders Standard Circle Small. I'm going to center it over top of my sentiment. And then I'm going to take some washi tape and just hold that in place. So I'm going to take this, run it through my Big Shot, and then I will be back. So I finished die cutting my circle and I'm ready to stamp my sentiment, and I'm using this birthday image from the Baby Party Animals stamp set from Simon Says Stamp, and I already have it mounted to my Fiskars small stamp press. So I'm going to emboss it once again with my Onyx Black VersaFine ink, and I'm going to follow the same process as I did when I embossed the circular greeting. So once I've done that, I will be back. So you can see here what my embossed sentiment looks like. And now I want to stamp and color my image. And I'm using this adorable little monkey image from the Simon Says Stamp Baby Party Animals stamp set, which is the same one I got the birthday sentiment from. And I'm inking my stamp in my Memento Tuxedo Black ink from Sukaneko and stamping it onto a scrap piece of my Simon Says Stamp 120-pound white cardstock. So to color in my monkey, I'm going to use 3 different colors of Copic markers, E31, 34, and 37. I'm going to use 31 for his tummy, his face, and the inner portion of his ears. And then I'm going to shadow with a little bit of E34. And then for the rest of the body, I'm going to use E34 and E37. Now I tend to work with my darkest to lightest colors. You can work either way, lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest, a lot of it's preference. I'm going to use a flicking motion, so I hold my marker on an angle, I touch the tip, I don't hold it though, I touch and flick. It's also often called a feather stroke. Then when I bring in my next color, I do the same kind of motion, but I slightly overlap the first color. And your initial layer, you're not going to get a good blend. It's when you come in with subsequent layers that the colors really start to blend and you see the magic of Copics. So I'm going to start with the E31 and E34, and I'm going to start with his body. So because this is such a fine area, I'm barely angling my brush. I'm kind of holding it upwards, and I'm just using the tip to color it in. And then you'll see me come in and start blending it out towards the center. Now I'm going to speed up the camera so that you don't have to sit there and watch me coloring in real time. So now that I've finished coloring my image, I'm taking a fine-tipped pair of scissors and I'm just going to cut him out, just following all along the lines of his body. I don't want to leave any kind of a white border around him. So I finished cutting out my monkey and I've placed him where I'm thinking of sitting him on my sentiment. And then I want to stamp this balloon to have him holding that. Now because the balloon needs to be stamped on a very precise angle, I've decided to use my MISTI for this. So I'm holding my piece down with 4 magnets. I've got my little monkey positioned where I'm planning on sticking him down, and then I've got the balloon on the exact angle that I wanted. So now I'm just going to go ahead and close the top of my MISTI to pick up my stamp, and because I'm going to be coloring it in Copic ink, I'm using my Memento Tuxedo black ink for this. So I'm just pressing it against my stamp, and then I'm going to fold the door closed and press and stamp my image like so. So there you can see that balloon is exactly where I wanted it. Now I'm going to go ahead and stamp a second balloon onto a scrap piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to color that one out as well. So I went ahead and colored the extra balloon that I stamped onto a scrap piece of paper, and then the one that I stamped onto my circular sentiment piece. And I used V1, V5, and V6 Copic markers, and I chose colors that coordinated as closely as possible to the seedless preserves that I used for my background. Now I've gone ahead and put some foam squares at the back, dimensional foam, and I'm going to now mount the one balloon that I cut on top of this balloon, and then I'm going to take the little monkey. I also put some dimensional foam on his back, and I'm going to stick that, and now make sure that I position him so that his hand is over top of the strings that it looks like he's holding onto the balloon. So there you can see how that looks. So now I've decided that I want to mount this onto my watercolor paper like this, but I want to have it overhang and just trim that overhanging edge. So I've positioned it where I wanted it. I'm putting a little bit of temporary adhesive underneath just so it stays in place while I flip it over and then use my scissors to just cut off that overhanging edge like so. Now, unfortunately, my camera was not recording during this next step, but what I did was I took a cluster of pink embroidery thread, placed it over top of my watercolor paper piece, and then stuck down my circular sentiment using some Tombow Mono multi-liquid glue. So I have here an A2 card I created out of 120 pound Simon Says stamp cardstock, and then I stuck a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of cotton candy cardstock from Simon Says stamp directly on top using my Tombow Mono multi-liquid glue. Now I'm going to stick down my panel onto the center of my card front, and for that I'm using some 1/2 inch wide, a 1/16 of an inch thick dimensional foam strips, and I buy these on the humongous rolls because it's more economical. So I'm just going to center and stick this onto my card front. So after mounting my panel to my card front, I then finished off by embellishing with a few of the Simon Says Stamp Assorted Moonshine sequins. And that's how I created my card. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and I look forward to creating with you again.